Good evening. Mr. Evans here with the 7th chapter of our book, The Trouble with Terry by Joan Lenau. Chapter 7 is called Wish Before Blowing. On her way upstairs for lunch, Terry glanced at the mail table near the front door. It was used for mail too large for the boxes, and today it was piled high with thick catalogs. She shuffled through them until she found the one addressed to her mother and took it upstairs. But before she settled down with it, there was something she meant to do. What was it? Oh yes, the eggs. Today was her first day of cooking supper. Her mother told her to make scrambled eggs because Terry knew how, and sausages because they were easy. Terry said nothing, but she liked her eggs hard-boiled, and that was how she intended to have them. She had decided to cook them while she was home for lunch, so they would be cold by supper time. She put 2 eggs in a pan of water and put a match to the burner, standing well away from it, as her mother had showed her long ago. Then she slapped some apple jelly on bread and sprawled on the floor in the other room with the catalog. Remember, she told herself, wipe up the crumbs so she doesn't know I've been eating in here. Bicycles first, she sighed. The lowest priced one was an unreachable $30. She had $8.57 now because Tommy had paid her for helping him with his route a couple of times. How close was she? Did she divide 8 by 30 or 30 by 8? Soon the catalog page was covered with figures, and she still had no idea. Well, she could subtract. That gave her almost $21.50 to go. That was clear enough. It was too far. Next to her own bicycle was a funny bicycle built for 2. There was no limit to the marvelous things to be found in the catalog. When Terry was ill, her mother always brought out the catalog along with the awful hot lemonade and the senna tea. Terry browsed next. On another page, she also found a spirit duplicator, which sounded fascinating. It turned out to have something to do with printing. And here was a winch. She'd always thought that was an English lady, but it was a machine that rope was not included with. There were tree planters with a lot of little pots on them. They didn't look strong enough for trees. Where would the roots go? Monkeys. She could have a monkey for a few dollars more than her bicycle. Her mother would probably say no, though, or else the landlord would. Cats were allowed, but not dogs. So monkeys were definitely out. The rocking lounger certainly looked comfortable. That would be nice for her mother when she was especially tired. Someday she would buy her mother one, and a house, and an electric dishwasher. Did they dry dishes too? Yes, they did. Maybe she should buy her mother a guitar. Her mother never seemed to have much fun. She didn't even like to ride on Ferris wheels. It must be awful to be a grown-up and not like anything anymore. Here were the girls' clothes, the section Terry used to make paper dolls from. Once her mother had been awfully mad because she'd cut it apart before she'd seen it. Usually dresses didn't interest Terry. They were something to throw on for school or church, but once in a while she saw a dress that took her breath away. She saw one now. It had a gray and blue and red plaid full-skirted jumper over a bright red dress. The dress had ruffles on the elbow-length sleeves, but it was $6.98. That was an awful lot for one dress. What was she worried about? Her birthday was coming in a couple of weeks. She was sure her mother would spend a little extra for a dress. Her heart sank. Her mother wasn't working overtime for the fun of it. Terry scolded herself for thinking about presents when she should be thinking of ways to help her mother. Maybe she wouldn't even get a present. She shouldn't expect one. What she should really do is tell her mother not to buy one, and say it as though she meant it. That wouldn't be easy, but she could practice up first. Anyway, if her mother didn't need her bike money, Terry could buy the dress with it. Her mother couldn't object to that. As soon as her mother was through working overtime, she would ask her. Suddenly she was aware of a heavy pounding on the door. "Terry, are you there?" Cindy called. Terry ran to the door. Cindy and Kim were there, looking anxious. "We thought you were dead," Kim said. "We've been tapping and tapping. What happened to you? You said you'd meet us. It's been over an hour." "It can't be," Terry said. "I just got here." Wham! An explosion sounded from the other room. "What was that?" Cindy shrieked. "Gosh, it sounded like a rifle," Terry said. "At least it sounded like the rifles on TV. I better see what it is," she said bravely, her heart pounding. The three of them crowded through the doorway. "Phew, what a smell!" Kim exclaimed. Cindy rushed to open the window, but it was already open. "My eggs," Terry moaned as an eggshell crunched under her foot. "My hard-boiled eggs. They're all over the place." There were pieces of egg and eggshell on the stove, in the sink, and on the floor. "We'll practically have to take the stove apart to get it clean," Cindy said. They set to work, sweeping and scrubbing, and soon had things to rights, except that the pan the eggs were in would probably never look the same again. Terry was worried that things would continue the way they had started, but that evening supper went smoothly, although eggs were the last thing she wanted. And she wished she hadn't burned the sausages quite so much, because it made the frying pan difficult to clean. "That wasn't too bad," Tommy said as he dried the dishes. Terry was glad he had to help, but she wished he'd put the dishes away in the right places. After he was through, she had to straighten out the cupboard. At last, the first day's work was over. Her mother came home looking a little tired, but she smiled on seeing her kitchen in good order. Terry waited to be praised. She was amazed herself at the good job she had done, except for the exploding eggs. But all her mother said was, "Well, just as I expected. You see, there's nothing to it." Terry scowled. Was that all her reward for trying so hard? Nothing to it, my foot, she thought. "I guess I'm not much good at making jokes when I'm tired," her mother said. "I did mean it nicely, Terry." "Oh," Terry said, brightening. She wished her mother would ring a bell or something when she made a joke. The days went quickly by. Sometimes Terry felt like complaining about the extra work. Dishes broke, food was burned or underdone. Once she put too much salt in the potatoes. Now and then Tommy made a face over his meal, but he said nothing. Yet she didn't have the heart to complain. Each night her mother looked more tired. It was in her eyes especially that Terry noticed it. They no longer seemed able to look straight through her and see everything she'd been up to. On Saturday of the first week, Terry was free to do whatever she chose. But her mother looked so weary that Terry begged to be allowed to help hang up the wash. "If you're sure you want to," her mother said, "then I can get to the store earlier than I'd planned." Her mother carried the heavy clothes basket out. They bent and stretched, hanging the clothes until Terry began to feel like a yo-yo. She didn't think much of the system. There must be a better way. And a better idea came to her. Holding all the wet wash she could manage on one arm, she slung things one by one over the line. Her mother followed close behind her and pinned them. It saved a lot of time, and her mother was pleased at not having to do any bending. Terry wondered if there was some way she could sell the idea. There might be a fortune in it. While they were working, Terry told her mother about the dress in the catalog she'd like to buy someday. Her mother said she would take a look at it. "By the way," Mrs. Seth said, "don't forget to invite Cindy and Kim and Soupy to your birthday party." "You haven't said a thing about your birthday. Did you forget it was coming?" "No, I didn't forget," Terry said. "I don't need a party. Or any presents either. She tried to say it as though she were looking forward to skipping her birthday, but it came out sort of miserable. Her mother couldn't help laughing, and Terry didn't blame her. "We'll manage something," Mrs. Seth said. "You know, Terry, lately I've been so pleased with—" She didn't finish. Just then, Terry reached in for the last of the wash, putting one foot on the edge of the basket. The basket tipped, and the contents and Terry tumbled into the dirt together. "I'm sorry," Terry said, getting to her feet. "I know," her mother said resignedly. "Run along now and let me finish this. You've been helping all week. Enough is enough." She had worked hard all week, Terry thought, but her mother had worked even harder. Still, going away seemed the best thing she could do right now. She walked slowly to Cindy's. On the way, she found a caterpillar and stroked the furry, wriggling animal, wishing she could trade places with it. "All you have to do is slither around until it's time to turn into a butterfly," she told it bitterly. But, as often happened when she felt miserable, Terry soon had something to feel more miserable about. Cindy and Kim couldn't come to her party. They were both going to camp for a week, starting the day before her birthday. "But why do you have to go then?" Terry asked. "I'm sorry, Terry. Kim signed us up long ago. She didn't know it was your birthday. She asked me if I wanted to go. You weren't playing with us then, so I figured that week was as good as any other," Cindy said. "We've been meaning to tell you, but somehow we just never got it out," Kim said. "And you can't change the time at the camp or get your money back if you don't go." "You aren't mad, are you, Terry?" "No, I'm not mad," Terry said. "It just happened, I guess." "Maybe you could have the party some other day," Cindy suggested. "It wouldn't be the same," Terry said. And she stuck to that. Her mother and Tommy both insisted she have it earlier or later, but she refused. If she couldn't have a birthday party on her birthday, she didn't want one. Soupy came home the next day and told Terry all about his visit at least a dozen times, pausing now and then to ask, "Did you miss me?" Terry assured him that she had. Terry's second week of cooking went easier. She avoided some of the mistakes of the first week. She was glad to see Saturday come. It wasn't the work she minded so much as her mother's tiredness. Her mother was too tired even to be cross. It made Terry uneasy. She hoped whatever trouble they were in was over now. But instead of resting on Saturday, Mrs. Seth went downtown shopping and was gone most of the day. Terry and Soupy went to say goodbye to Cindy and Kim, who were leaving for camp early the next afternoon. On the way, Soupy said, "I could come to your birthday, Terry, if you wanted me to. I'm not asking. Daddy said not to ask." "Soupy, of course you're coming. You always do." I told you to, didn't I?" Terry replied. "No, you didn't," Soupy said sadly. Terry mentally kicked herself. What a stupid thing to forget. "You're silly," she said. "I wouldn't think of not having you. We won't exactly have a party, but you come for supper and we'll think of something fun to do." "That's good," Soupy said, "'cause Daddy got you a present away from Michigan. You want to know what it is?" "You're not allowed to tell," Terry said sharply. What could it be that Mr. O'Halloran had to send for it from Michigan? She wished Soupy was a little bit older so she could wheedle it out of him honorably. They found Cindy and Kim packing Kim's things in her room. Cindy was already packed. Awkwardly, they talked for a while about nothing in particular. Suddenly, Kim exclaimed, "I wish you were going with us, Terry." "We'll write to you, honest," Cindy said. It would be nice to get a letter, Terry thought. Before she left, Kim and Cindy each gave her a present. Terry felt them on the way home. Kim's was a shapeless lump. Cindy's was flat and oblong, a good sign. And the paper gave on 3 sides. That clinched it. It was a book. Maybe it was a Nancy Drew. She had to wait all through Sunday to find out. But she didn't have to wait long on Monday, her birthday. A heavy pounding awakened her, and she opened her eyes as her mother went to the door. There was Soupy in his pajamas, with some kind of plant in his hands. "Soupy, do you know what time it is?" Mrs. Seth asked. "Terry isn't even awake yet." "Yes, I am," Terry said, jumping out of bed. "You might as well stay for breakfast," Mrs. Seth said to Soupy. "I don't suppose your father knows you're here." "He's still asleep," Soupy said. "He didn't say I couldn't come." Soupy gave Terry the plant. "It's got a card on it," he said. The card was as large as the plant. It was typed, but Soupy had signed his name. "For Terry, with love, from Soupy." She had taught him that the day he came home from kindergarten, crying bitterly because they made him write Kevin instead of his real name. His father always called him Kevin, so the name wouldn't seem completely strange to him, but Soupy preferred the other. After admiring the card, Terry turned to the plant. She couldn't believe her eyes. It looked like a miniature rose bush. There were several buds with one tiny pink flower and lots of dainty little leaves. She felt one of the tiny buds. "Ouch!" she cried. It had to be a rose bush. It had thorns. She threw her arms around Soupy and hugged him. "It's a wonderful present, isn't it, Mom?" "It certainly is," Mrs. Seth said. "I never saw anything like it. But I have to hurry now. You and Soupy sit down. Your cereal is ready. Tommy, time to get up." Tommy threshed around a few times, knocked his pillow on the floor, and fell on the floor himself when he tried to pick it up. He leaped to his feet, splashed cold water on his face at the sink, and he was ready to face the day. He joined his sister and Soupy at the table while Mrs. Seth prepared to leave. "You can open the presents you have, but can you wait for tonight for the rest, Terry?" her mother asked. "Sure," Terry said. "All right, come and get your birthday greeting," said her mother. Terry received a kiss and a spank. "Take whichever shoe fits," her mother said. They both laughed. This was a yearly ritual. Mrs. Seth left for work, saying she would be home as soon as possible. Terry went back to her breakfast. "Happy birthday," Tommy said with his mouth full. Terry opened her presents from Cindy and Kim while she ate. The book from Cindy was Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch. It wasn't a title that she would reach for on a library shelf, but Cindy must have had a reason. At any rate, Terry wasn't about to dislike a book that was hers to keep. Kim's gift was a china porcupine full of toothpick quills. "What's it for?" Tommy asked. "I don't know. Hey, look, the toothpicks come out," Terry said. "Let's take 'em all out and put 'em in again." "Sounds real exciting, but I gotta get dressed and go," Tommy said on his way to the other room. Terry let Soupy play with her porcupine while she studied her rosebush. "I know something I can't tell," Soupy said. "What is it?" "You can tell me, can't you?" Terry coaxed, wondering what he was up to. Soupy watched her out of the corner of his eyes. "Nope, can't," he said. "But it's about a birthday." "My birthday?" Maybe he had another surprise for her. "Nope," Soupy said, still watching her. Suddenly, Terry caught on. "I know your birthday's coming in a couple of weeks. Anyway, you could have told me that right out." "Daddy said I can't remind people on account of the presents. Daddy says people should give presents because they want to, not because I remind them," Soupy announced virtuously. Terry decided she would get something very nice for Soupy's birthday. She didn't know exactly what, but she would still have enough money after buying her dress. "Soupy, you want to see my bike money?" she said, groping around for it in the cupboard. She looked on the shelf where she remembered putting it, on the shelf above and the shelf below. "Tommy," she yelled in a panic, "my money's gone." Her brother didn't seem concerned. He came in to get his paper bag and told her not to worry about it. Maybe you put it someplace else and forgot," he said. "Forgot where I put nearly $10, she shrieked, but Tommy was gone. Something was going on. If Tommy wasn't alarmed about the money, it meant he knew where it was and didn't want to say. But he wouldn't take it. The only thing she could think of was that her mother might have needed the money and was too embarrassed to say so. That didn't make much sense. She gave up thinking about it. "Go get dressed, Soupy. I'll meet you outside," she said. They played together all morning. It was dull without Cindy and Kim, and she was afraid the boys would chase them away. After an early lunch at Soupy's, they went out to the treehouse with Mrs. Wiggs. Soupy loved to be read to. He didn't care what sort of book it was. The story wasn't nearly as bad as the title sounded. Mrs. Wiggs had a bunch of children, and there were funny happenings and lots of troubles. But the end of chapter 2 was disturbing. "And he fearlessly drifted away into the shadowy valley where his lost childhood lay," Terry read. "Now isn't that mean?" she exclaimed. "It's one of those places where they don't make out if somebody's dying or dreaming. I hate it when they do that. How is she supposed to know whether to cry or not?" Soupy wasn't any help. Neither was chapter 3. Terry leafed through it and saw it was a lot of garbage about some man and lady who had nothing to do with the story having a fight. The story didn't pick up again until the 4th chapter, but Terry didn't allow herself to skip. She was rescued by the arrival of the boys. "Sorry, we'll be using the treehouse now," Greg said. "Oh, let 'em stay," Tommy said. "It's Terry's birthday, and she isn't even having a party. Besides, we've never had a meeting with the auxiliary present." None of the others objected. Tommy called the roll, but Greg was lost in thought and didn't answer. Suddenly, Greg read down the ladder. "Don't anybody go away," he yelled back. "I got me an idea." "More like he got him a fit," Mike commented. They waited impatiently. At last, Greg was back with a whole graham cracker pie, a pile of dishes, and a knife. "Mom wanted me to bring forks, too, but I told her we didn't need them," he said breathlessly. Tommy cut the pie while Greg explained. "I knew she had this pie, see, but she said it had to wait for dinner. So when I went back, I said how Terry wasn't having a party and how sad it was, and I kept looking at that pie. So what could she do?" The pie disappeared in a hurry. It tasted much better in handfuls than forkfuls, Terry decided. When Tommy had to leave for his route, Terry and Soupy went to her apartment to read more about Mrs. Wiggs. They went through the boring chapter and finally got back to the interesting part. It turned out that Jim had died after all. Well, she should have known when she saw that Shadowy Valley was capitalized. Supper didn't take any time to make because it was all store-bought. Mrs. Seth brought home chicken chow mein, ice cream, and a cake with "Happy Birthday, Terry" on it. The rose bush was placed in the center of the table next to the cake, and the 11 candles were lit. Terry gulped down her chow mein. Her presence would come with the blowing out of the candles. Everyone else seemed to be taking his time. "Hurry up, Soupy," she whispered. She stared at the flickering candles and wondered why she didn't feel a year older. Now Tommy was only a year ahead of her. Yesterday he'd been 2 years older. That was the sort of thing she felt that arithmetic should explain, but didn't. Finally, Tommy dragged out a package from under his bed. Terry took a deep breath and blew out all the candles. "Did you wish?" her mother asked quickly, just as she started to blow. There wasn't any time to think. The best Terry could do was to say silently, "I wish awful things would stop happening to me," as she finished blowing. The tag on the package said, "For Terry from Mother." She tore it open. There was a mass of bright red and another of plaid. "My dress!" Terry shouted. It wasn't a dress. It was yards and yards of material. "The dress cost too much," her mother explained, "so I thought I'd make one. Saturday I looked all over for a plaid close to the one you wanted. The dress pattern isn't exactly right either, but almost." "I didn't even know you could make a dress," Terry said in awe. "Well, I've never tried it, so I don't know that I can't," her mother replied. "It will probably take me a while, so I hope you'll be patient." "That's okay," Terry said. "It's a swell present. Thank you." All through the cake and ice cream, nothing was said about a present from Tommy. He kept looking at his mother and grinning, and she smiled back at him. What was so funny? The moment they were through eating, Mrs. Seth said, "Let's go see if anyone's using the washing machine. Come on, Terry." Wash clothes on her birthday? With the dishes still on the table? It was crazy. Crazier still, Tommy wanted to come too. With Soupy following, they all trooped down to the basement. No one was washing clothes. "Let's see if any lines are free," Mrs. Seth said. They went into the drying room. Why didn't her mother want to hang the clothes outside? It didn't look like rain. It was perfectly obvious that the clotheslines were empty, yet her mother and brother just stood there waiting. Terry looked around. There in a corner were the bikes, Tommy's and the one Mike and Danny shared. But it looked like there were 3 bikes. She went closer. One was a red bike with a huge red bow on the handlebars. It was a girl's bike. In fact, it was the one in the catalog. It couldn't be. There was a note tied to the ribbon. It said, "For Terry, from Mother, Tommy, and Terry." Part of it was your bike money, her mother explained. Terry still couldn't believe it. How could they buy a bike when they needed money so badly? Then she realized why her mother had worked overtime. Suddenly she burst into tears and ran to her mother. "For Pete's sake, don't you like it?" Tommy asked in disgust. "She likes it," her mother said, patting Terry gently. Terry dried her tears quickly and dragged her bike up the stairs. "You'd better take your bike and go with her," Mrs. Seth told Tommy. "She might forget to come home." Soupy and Mrs. Seth followed them outside. Terry mounted her bike and rode off without a backward glance. Tommy raced after her, shifting gears rapidly and trying to catch up to her. "Terry," Soupy called forlornly. "Come inside," Mrs. Seth said. "Terry's in another world just now. I'll tell you a story while I do the dishes." Terry, pedaling furiously, was still amazed. Come to think of it, she hadn't even asked permission to take the bike out after supper, but her mother hadn't said a word to stop her. In fact, her mother hadn't yelled at her much at all lately. She must really have decided that Terry couldn't help what she did. But that wasn't a very happy thought. From far behind, a voice yelled, "Terry, will you slow down a little? Will you look where you're going? Terry!" Some racer this bike is, Tommy thought. Can't even keep up with a girl. That is the end of our chapter for this evening. I will be back again tomorrow night with Chapter 8. Have a good evening.